I got it. Huh? I got you. I got you.
Right,
We're gonna bring this podium over there to the edge of that, and then we're gonna bring the table up.
Okay.
So move this first. Move that over there. So that it's sitting right. Yes.
Okay.
A little more.
All right.
A little more.
Now the table, we're going to bring this table up.
Nobody trips on them.
Yeah. I know because you go forward. You can't, if you got your shoes on, you got to go back down the other side or take them off. How you doing it?
Oh, no, that's not shoes. They're not shoes, Mutai.
What's not
Those
shoes?
are our feet.
I'm not one talking to her.
Who are you talking about?
I don't even know who I know I was talking to somebody.
You told her.
No, did I? I might have.
Yep. That's it. It's on. Huh? I know.
Wait, you gotta sit down.
Arlene, wait.
This is on the loose. Are you taking a selfie? Making us think it's us?
I need 30 seconds at the beginning. Thanks. Don't count it. Thank you.
Now, yes. Okay, folks. Shh. I'm going to ask everyone, please, to take seats quickly. I'm Rabbi Phyllis Berman, and I'm so happy you're all here tonight. For those of you who are just joining us now for Seder, I want to welcome you to Masjid Ullah. This masjid, this house of God, has been here since 2013. And before it was a house of God for Muslims, it was a house of God for Christians. It was the church of the West Oak Lane Church of God. And before it was a house of God for Christians, it was a house of God for Jews. It was Temple Sinai from 1947 on. So there's a verse in our Psalms that says, "My house will be a house of prayer for all people." And tonight we're making that so, a house of prayer for all people. Some of us are Jews, some of us are Christians, some of us are Muslims, some of us have faith that shows in a million different ways and spirit in a million different ways. And we are all here together celebrating perhaps the very first Seder in the United States, maybe in all history, that has ever been in a mosque. So Arthur and I live together. And like many couples, we often text each other or email each other in the same house. But we didn't email each other about what he was going to say and what I was going to say. So he's already said some of what I was going to say, which is, it is traditional when Jews experience things for the first time to say the prayer of Shehechianu, the prayer that says, "Isn't it amazing that of all people, it is us here, and of all places, this is it, and at all times, here we are now." And one way of saying this is silently to look around and see this room filled with people. And in the shorthand of our dear friend Liz Lerman, the dancer and choreographer, and also a winner of a MacArthur Genius Award, she said, the simple meaning of this prayer is, wow. So please join me. Wow. Tonight there are two people who aren't here with us, on whose shoulders this Seder is built. One of them, of blessed memory, is the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And Arthur will, when he spoke at Riverside Church, the church where for many years, for more than 37 years, I ran a school for adults in New York to learn English because they came from all over the world and couldn't function here until they had enough English. When Reverend King spoke at Riverside Church in 1968, he said that our society was being poisoned by the triplets of racism, militarism, and materialism. Here we are 50 years, actually 51 years since he said that, and that hasn't changed. And we're adding to those three this year, particularly this year, one that he wasn't talking about in 1968, but it was happening then too, and that is the poison of sexism. So we are gathered here tonight particularly to talk about those four poisons. And we are also here through the work and the leadership of Joanna Macy, who has taught that before people can open themselves to the pain of what's wrong, we need to start with joy. We need to ground ourselves in those things that make us happy, that make life full and wonderful. And it's only then that we're grounded in that teaching that we can begin to feel and let in the horrors that some of us, all of us, are living in at this time. And it's only then that we can begin to transform what's paining us by the work that we do all together. So I just want to credit that influence on our time with one another. And I'm going to ask you, you'll find in the Seder, on page 6, that all Seders begin with a question. And usually in most Seders, it's the youngest people who are guiding what we're going to talk about. They ask, why is this night different from all other nights? The Hebrew words, manishtana, halayla hazeh, mikol halelot. Why is this very night, 2019, April 7th, 2019, why is this night different from all other nights? And we have 4 possible answers. And that's where we're going to build our Seder. So I'd like you to join with me in reading those answers.
Somebody blocking me. I get somebody's car.
Sorry.
I don't know who it is. Where's
Sorry, there's a problem.
Somebody is blocking the way. I don't know which car it is. Yes, I think it's in the driveway.
Okay. So I don't know what we're going to do about that.
Right here. What's the announcement?
I'm sorry. There's a Cayenne, a black Cayenne that's blocking entrance there. And it can't be there in the event God willing we're always put you there. We shouldn't have an emergency. Even if it's something that happened. There's a black Cayenne. I'm gonna use my drill sergeant. How's everyone this evening? First off.
Woo!
Head of security. He's the head of our security.
Okay.
All right, I'll use the microphone. There's a black Cayenne parked outside. It's blocking the entrance. There's too much good here right now for anything to happen, but in the event that something did, I want the fire and rescue to have the availability to come in here and help one of us if we need it. So if you have a black Cayenne parked right out here, Cayenne, it's a black SUV, Porsche SUV. Don't want to put anybody on the spot, so leave like 10 minutes so nobody sees you, and just move it across the street, all right? Thank you very much.
All right. Whatever we plan, God has another plan for us. Okay, so why is this night different from all other nights? Please read with me On this night, we share our joy and love of one another and for the natural world. On this night, we share our pain and sorrow for the sufferings of each other and the earth. On this night, we open our eyes to new ways of seeing what's true. And on this night, we define our commitment to act for justice, peace, and healing. So the purpose of questions in a Seder is so that those who know some of the history can do a telling of that history to those who may not know it, especially to the younger ones. And the word, the telling in Hebrew, is Haggadah. A Haggadah is the book we use for Pesach, for Passover, that tells the ancient story. What we're going to be doing tonight is telling the current story. And it's what we often do at our own Seders at home. It's not the book of the old story that we tell, but the story of the people who are sitting at our table. And in that way, we begin to build community. So tonight, we're going to attempt to do that in many different ways. Some of it will happen through the telling from the people who are sitting up here at this table, at these tables. Some of it will happen for the people who are sitting at your table, you and the person you are sitting next to, or the person who is sitting on the other side of you. And the quality that we can bring, each of us, not so much with our ears, but so much with our hearts, with our willingness to hear, with our desire to listen, not just to the speakers who are at the microphone, but to the speaker who is sitting next to us, and perhaps even to ourselves. So I'm going to ask you the first challenging thing that you need to do, we're going to ask you to do this evening. Look around you at your table. Perhaps you came with a person sitting on one side of you. If you did, please turn to one person on the other side of you. Just one person. Shh. You can do that with your eyes and with your body, but not with your mouth, if you can. So I'm going to ask you, please, not 3 people, not 4 people, but just 2. And I'm going to ask you to take just 2 minutes, one for each, to share with that person something that gives you joy. Please turn to another person. I'll signal when the 2 minutes are up. Yes. But it'll work this way, even on my hand. Okay. So one aspect of Seder is that we deliberately ingest ritual foods that represent in our past the very feelings that we are talking about. And so you will find on your tables two unmarked little packages of charoset. Charoset is a combination of apples and sometimes raisins, of nuts and other things. And I just want to tell you something very special about this charoset. Shh. Ordinarily, when families who are making Seder in their home prepare for Seder, we look for foods that are kosher for Passover. When I looked for charoset this year, I looked for foods that are halal for Passover. No one had ever heard of that. But we needed to have charoset that wasn't made with wine. It was made with grape juice. And so this was made especially for this Seder by Weaver's Way in Philadelphia. So, let me just say a drop more about this. This is what it is all about. We are being hosted by Muslims. They don't drink wine. So how do we stretch ourselves so that we can honor one another's ways of being? I thought a lot about this, talking to several of my dear women friends, and we know that when we begin to have a relationship with someone we don't know, we're very polite. And it's really at the moment that we feel comfortable with one another that we can show the whole of ourselves, the parts that are stressed and the parts that are upset. And it's in those moments that the real relationship begins to grow. It grows out of being truly ourselves. So one of the joys of this Seder experience is for us getting to know some of the people we've worked with here at this masjid. So I'm going to ask you, without any words, in silence, just taking in what you said and what the person next to you said about joy in this moment, to please pass around the charoset, and each person take some and put them on your plate. And when we're done, when all is done, when it's passed completely around the table, we will move on. So I didn't taste it ahead of time, but I hope it's as sweet as what has been giving you joy. So together, all of us, we move from joy to the beginning of pain and sorrow. And let's repeat that second answer to the question. This night is different from all other nights because, number two, on this night, for the sufferings of each other and the earth. So I'm going to give you another challenge right now. All of the key speakers, the primary speakers about these 4 isms are described here in your booklet, but don't look at them now because you don't want to miss a word that anyone is saying. And I bring to you Dr. Debbie Almontaser.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace and greetings, my sisters and my brothers. I'm so honored and humbled and privileged to be a part of this Seder. A Seder that has so much history and so much legacy that has been left for us. A legacy that we are here tonight to make sure that we carry once we leave this beautiful mosque. To share the stories, to share the wisdom with our neighbors, our colleagues, because we owe it to our communities and future generations to make sure that we live in a society that is embracing and loving of all people, no matter where they come from, what language they speak, what they choose to wear, who they choose to love. It is so critical for us to be the movement that will change the world. I have been given the opportunity to speak to you about pain and sorrow. We certainly have been feeling pain and sorrow. And I can tell you that for the last 18 years, for me as an American Muslim woman in America post 9/11, there has been a lot of pain and sorrow. This pain and sorrow, my sisters and brothers, has manifested in Islamophobia, a phobia of people who are Muslim, created by fear to fear your neighbor who looks like you, who cries like you, who bleeds like you. A phobia that was created by hysteria through white supremacy. White supremacy has been around for hundreds of years, and we have seen it manifest in many ways. Let us never forget the Holocaust. Let us never forget what happened to our brothers and sisters in the Native American Indian community, our African American sisters and brothers, and communities thereafter that have experienced all of these terrible things that exist within our society. And so today, my sisters and brothers, we are here to start a new chapter in our history as Americans and global citizens. We are here to say that we refuse to allow racism to plague our schools, our government institutions, and our communities. We are going to make sure that this happens by being awoke and standing up and showing up for each other and speaking out. We are here to combat the racism that has separated the families from the southern borders of the United States to the shores of Africa through the Trump immigration policies that have been creating havoc across the world. Let it be known, my sisters and brothers, that America was created by the people for the people. And when we came Thank you. When we came to this nation, there was no one there giving visas to the people coming off the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. All were welcomed, and we know what we did, sadly, with that welcome. And we today here are not going to allow that to repeat. We are going to commit to making sure that the policies that have been created by this administration will not stand. I call on you my sisters and brothers, to join me in repealing the Muslim ban. I call on you, my sisters and brothers, to join me on making sure that we stamp out the refugee ban. I call on you, my sisters and brothers, to join me in standing against hate of all forms. A hate that has actually led to mass shootings. Let us not forget Oak Creek, the Sikh temple, or Charlottesville Church, the Tree of Life Synagogue, and the New Zealand mosques just weeks ago. We must vow to make sure that we rid hate wherever it shows its ugly head. Now, I know that this is just simply talk, but we have to put it to action, my sisters and brothers. And the way we put it out there in the world as actions is we need to be civically and politically engaged. If you have been a person who said, well, I don't know where to begin, I don't know how to do this, find an organization in your community and join them. Join in the fight against immigration policies. Identify immigrant rights organizations. Identify healthcare organizations. Identify Planned Parenthood organizations. Identify organizations that work against hate and join them. Every time you see or hear anything in the media, you can do something. Flood the phones of the editors. Write them letters. Go out there and protest if we need to. Because hate is coming and seeping through the media. And if we continue to be complacent in this situation, then this hate will continue to resonate and to divide our community. So I say to you, my brothers and sisters, we have a lot of work to do. We have 3 years that we can change the landscape of America. We change the landscape of America by making sure that we register more people to vote. And most importantly, we get them out to vote. And we do this through telling our stories. Today, you have the opportunity to hear from an incredible lineup of distinguished speakers who will tell their truths and tell the stories of their communities. And the only way we can do that to change the mindset is by sharing our own stories. There is nothing more powerful than storytelling. And so I'm going to close by also sharing with you, as many of you may know, I'm the founding principal of the Khalil Gibran International Academy, the first Arabic dual language public school in the United States, which was my American dream that turned into an American nightmare. I stood up and I fought institutional racism and bigotry and was vindicated in 2010. But I took my experience and wanted to see what was life like for American Muslims in public education who are school leaders. And through this, I've had the extraordinary opportunity to write research about the lives of 14 American Muslim principals, to tell their stories and their struggles and their aspirations in the face of racism and bigotry and today's Islamophobia. The book will be outside. I will be happy to sign it. Those of you who purchase it, I want you to know that the proceeds from the book will go to the children of Yemen. How many of you know about the war in Yemen? How many of you care about this incredible humanitarian disaster historically in the world? Thank you. So I hope that you will buy my book. You will not only be learning about American Muslim principles, but you will also be learning about the Catholic and Jewish experience when they first migrated to the U.S. and the adversity that they faced, and how we are all more alike than we are different. I thank you very much. Thank you. I thank you very much, and I know deep in my heart that when we build walls, when they build walls, we will build bridges to create a world that is loving and kind to all people. Thank you so much.
So we're going to pause for just a minute to hear the call for prayer for our Muslim brothers and sisters.
Our Mueddin, Brother Shaheed Muhammad, is going to do the call to prayer in Arabic, and I'm going to translate it in English. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. God is greater, God is greater. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. God is greater. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. I bear witness there is no God but the one God. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. I bear witness there is no God but the one God. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of God. Hayya ala salah. Come to prayer. Hayya ala salah. Come to prayer. Hayya ala falah. Come to success. Hayya ala falah. Come to success. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. God is greater, God is greater. La ilaha illallah. There is no God but the one God. And the prayer for the Muslims will be made downstairs.
So as we continue with the Seder and we look at racism, militarism, materialism, and sexism, regardless of who it is who speaks to us, we know and we understand that for people of color in this country, and perhaps through the world, these poisons are even more deadly. So let's keep that in mind, regardless of who speaks. I had said to you previously that in our Seder books, you'll find descriptions of the five main speakers, but we also have 5 speakers who are going to give you just a vignette of their own life experience, and their bios are not here in the book. So I'm going to do just a very brief introduction of each of them as they come up to speak. The first person who we're going to hear from is Jessica Way. She's an educator and a nurse, and she's been a spokeswoman for POWER, the organization of congregations throughout the Philadelphia area who have been fighting together for some of the things that we need to change in this city to make it a livable city for all people. And Jessica can tell you from her own life experience how the state's failure to fairly fund inner city schools, particularly inner city schools when the population is primarily children who are brown and black, how it is hurting children in so many ways, but particularly physically. So I give you Jessica Way.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here this evening. Teaching in the school district of Philadelphia means teaching in a state with the most inequitable state education funding formula in the entire country. It means that if you teach in a school district in Pennsylvania that serves primarily black and brown children, you are watching as they suffer from losing hundreds of millions of dollars that by design is going to richer, whiter school districts. Funding is not just dollars to us. Funding represents people who used to work in our buildings that are no longer with us anymore due to extensive budget cuts. We miss our people. We miss our counselors. We miss our secretaries. We miss our librarians. And we miss our maintenance staff that used to maintain our buildings in the district. Not having enough funding means that my school can't use the balcony in our auditorium because of all the flaking lead paint that is now covering the seats that we're unable to stay on top of and keep away. It means that routine maintenance doesn't happen, and a simple fix causes the ceiling to collapse at a big high school in South Philadelphia. It means that children sit on floors with asbestos tiles that are becoming loose. It means that kindergartners start their circle time in the morning on mats that are covered with mouse feces. It means that a kindergartner in Northeast Philadelphia got poisoned by lead paint and now suffers the lifetime effects of lead poisoning. It means that just this past month, a 5-year-old got second-degree burns from an exposed pipe sitting in their school bathroom. It is so easy to become accustomed to this new, dangerous normal in our Philadelphia schools. It's easy for us to turn our heads and say, isn't that a shame? I never want to become accustomed to this new normal. I want my students to know that they are beautiful and strong and worthy of good things, and I want us as a community to reinforce this message by fighting for the schools that they deserve. Thank you.
I want to introduce you to now Rabbi Sean Zevitt. He is not only the lead rabbi at Congregation Mishkan Shalom. Mishkan folks, can you just hold your hands up? Okay. but he's also the co-chair of the clergy group of POWER. And POWER, by the way, stands for Philadelphians Organized to Witness, Empower, and Rebuild.
Call and response. Oh, 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 oh. None of us are free till all of us are free. Summer 2018. The plague has its signature words. Jews shall not replace us. White supremacist arms ablaze with torches, marching through the streets of Charlottesville, emboldened from on high, and fanned by winds of intersecting racism, homophobia, xenophobia, Islamophobia, and yes, I hear you tell me to say it, anti-Semitism. After the election of 2016 unleashed a level of vitriol and chaotic leadership, over 200 of us Jewish clergy gather in New York as TRUA, Rabbis for Human Rights, to discuss and strategize how to respond to this moment. Eric Ward, a leading advocate for justice, an African-American leader who has devoted his professional life to countering racism and anti-Semitism, reminds us of the insidiousness of anti-Semitism and how it interweaves in all forms of hate. I pray you will join me in this fight, he says, for in the end I have come to see that as long as anti-Semitism is unchecked and allowed to fester, my liberation as an African American is also impossible, and yours as Jews likewise. Now, after Charlottesville, and if not then, surely after the blood-stained floors of the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. Even those of us working on our privilege, on our white privilege, who also present as white, working on all forms of discrimination and injustice in this country and around the world, striving to preserve democracy in Israel, self-determination and end to the oppression for the Palestinian people, naming every prejudice, are we willing to name this plague too? In a society in which only recent history we were considered non-white minorities, blocked from a variety of professions and neighborhoods and colleges, and the slideshow kicks in. I walk the streets of Winnipeg, my childhood neighborhood. There's a new kid standing next to some others. He walks towards me and punches me in the stomach. I bend over crying in pain and run home. Later we meet again and I ask, why did you do that? The older kids told me to punch the Jewish kid, he said. He is Polish Catholic. Eddie and I become close friends. Andy and I are a block apart as well, playing all the time. One Sunday after church, we are playing and he says, you killed Christ. And then he says, I'm sorry. We become better friends. I am 13 and a month after my November 2nd, 1972 bar mitzvah. We are off to Sydney, Australia, following my dad's professional options. The first week, I am amazed at how many Jews there seem to be in my public school of 1,500 boys. All of us dressed in matching gray shirts, pants, and ties. Hey, Jew, you Judim, permeate the halls and classrooms. It's not long before I realize that I am the only Jew in that school of 1,500. And I am also a figure of speech. When I hear the Jew word in science class one day, I turn to my close friend Mark, himself a biracial child of a native New Zealander and a white Australian, and I say, you know, I'm actually Jewish. He bolts up like a possessed person and pointing his finger at me shouts, you Jew! I am in shock. No one looks at us, just another swear word in the halls of the school. And Mark sits down back immediately and apologizes. I'm so sorry, mate. I just never met a Jew before. Our friendship deepens. We take in stands for each other. I am in university, working at my dad's photo finishing plant in Calgary, Alberta for the summer. Not every nun knows I'm the boss's son. I'm heading out for delivery and over here. What is it with this Jew boss hiring all these women as managers, these blacks and Vietnamese boat people? What the hell? What is this country coming to? It is coming into the light, I whisper to myself. After all, I just whisper because I'm still a good Jew, a special example, not wealthy, accepting, not like the other ones they know. I'm not yet ready to blow my cover. Saturday, October 27th, 2018. We are glowing at Mishkan Shalom. The wake of the beautiful bar and bat mitzvah of a brother and sister that morning. The young woman has written music to the holiness code of Leviticus 19. You shall love each other as you love yourself. We sing over and over again. As I leave the service, I am told the news. Bloodshed in the Tree of Life of Synagogue, the synagogue that houses Dor Chadash, a community I served for 3 years as visiting rabbi, 2005 to 8. In a house of God, there is no peace, only wailing. Illusions of safety and security are shattered. White supremacist hatred, hatred of our Jewish brothers and sisters who have dared help immigrants and refugees, fighting for sanctuary in this sweet land of liberty that holds the huddled masses. Then the names come in. The plague takes real souls, not statistics. Jerry Rabinowitz, dear Jewish brother with whom I served under your presidency, kind-hearted doctor who would not abandon those living with AIDS when the disease broke, who would embrace all and refuse to wear gloves, lest the human touch be denied those suffering. You rush in to support the fallen, and your life is extinguished. Your lifeless body joins the others. We cannot pretend that this particularly intertwined, complex, centuries-old hate, fear, and ignorance called anti-Semitism burned up with the Nazi death camps or dissipated in the acceptance of North American society, or can be extinguished by striking first. For in the end, none of us are free till all of us are free. Oh, none of us are free till all of us are free.
So I'm going to ask each of us to take a moment, actually a minute, in silence, and let in what you've heard from Debbie, from Jessica, from Sean, and what it strikes in yourself. And when you're ready, again, turn to that person or perhaps a different one person at your table and share one aspect of your own personal experience with racism. You'll have 2 minutes each. On each table, you'll find 2 probably unopened bottles of grape juice. It is a practice at any Seder. Listen for a moment before you start. You can try to open them, but don't do anything more. There are 2 cups for you, probably, I hope. There should be small cups and larger cups. The smallest cups, the little ones, are for grape juice. Make sure everybody at your table has a small cup. It's traditional in a Seder that we drink 4 cups. But this time we're going to be drinking in a somewhat different way. I'm going to invite you, please, to silently pass around the grape juice and the cups and fill your cup silently while Sean plays for us. And then together we will say a blessing. The same blessing we'll be saying 3 other times, but this time it will be in English. And each time after this, it will be in a different language. So. And when everyone at your table has grape juice, you'll find the words in English on page 7. And we are lifting our cups to call for the end of racism. And we say together, please, with me, "Blessed are you, breath of life, our God, by whatever name we call you, who brings forth the fruit of the vine."
Ain't nobody gonna turn us around, turn us around, turn us around. No, ain't nobody gonna turn us around. We're gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. No racism, ain't no racism gonna turn us around, turn us around, turn us around. We ain't gonna let no racism turn us around. We're gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. No anti-Semitism, ain't no anti-Semitism. Turn us around, turn us around, turn us around. We ain't gonna let no anti-Semitism turn us around. We're gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. Ain't nobody, no, ain't nobody gonna turn us around. Hey, turn us around. Hey, turn us around. We ain't gonna let nobody turn us around. We're gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land. Oh, brothers and sisters, yeah.
So we turn now to the poison of militarism. Rabbi Arthur Wasko.
So there are 2 people here. This is There's an old speaker's joke, a few words before I begin speaking. There are two people here who deserve that applause, in fact, more than me, for this 50th anniversary Freedom Seder. One you've already gotten to meet. The other, many of you have gotten to meet over telephones and computers. So I want Viv Hawkins, who's the program coordinator of the Shalom Center, to stand. I hope she's still in the room. Yeah? And Rabbi Phyllis Berman, you've already got. So as you've already heard, on April 4th, exactly 1 year before he was murdered, Dr. King spoke of 3 triplets, now quadruplets. And I asked myself, why did he say triplets? He could have said 3 or triad or trio. Why triplets? Triplets are a 3 that share the same DNA. So what is the DNA that racism, militarism, materialism, and sexism share? It's the impulse to subjugate, to put down, to insist that some rule over others. The ultimate form of subjugation is killing people who don't do what you want them to do, especially people who are acting with compassion, who are creating what Dr. King called beloved communities. In fact, the murder of Dr. King, at just the moment in his life when he had taken up the struggle to end the militarism of the Vietnam War, when he had taken up the struggle to champion the garbage workers of Memphis, when he had taken up the struggle to plan the first Poor People's Campaign, which has been enriched, expanded, multiplied by some of our folks here tonight. That's the moment when he was murdered. That moment crystallized a long, long, terrible history of top-down American violence, top-down American racism, top-down American materialistic greed, all in one moment. What did he say? He said a true revolution of values will lay hands on the world order and say of war, burning human beings with napalm, injecting poisonous drugs of hate into veins of people normally humane, sending people home from dark and bloody battlefields, physically handicapped and psychologically deranged, cannot be reconciled with wisdom or justice or love. So where are we now, 52 years later? The present U.S. government has undertaken a 30-year military program to produce many, many more nuclear weapons. The United States already has 7,000, enough to wipe out life on the planet. But more, and it will cost $1 trillion. That's 1,000 billion. $1 trillion. On top of what we've come to assume is the regular Pentagon budget, to modernize the nuclear weapons that are already able to destroy the planet. And maybe even worse than the plan, in the 2016 election campaign, in the debates, not a single question was raised by any reporter about this plan. It shares with the climate crisis these two, what would one call them? I don't even know the word. These two most likely to wipe out the human race of all the things we might be doing. Not a single question about this in the presidential campaign 2 years ago. Even worse than the fact, the absence of knowledge. What many call the worst humanitarian crisis on the planet now, we've already heard, the war against Yemen, carried on by the Saudi government with crucial help by the US government. In 5 years, thousands killed by bombs from the air, and more than 8 million Yemenis, a third of the population, already on the brink of famine. A war ordered by the prince of darkness, himself physically, individually, not just metaphorically, a murderer, committing mass murder with the help of the ruling family of the United States. The spiritual deformity of greed buys an all too bodily murder. The spiritual deformity of greed buys an all too bodily war. Another humanitarian crisis, the suffering of Gaza. Weapons made in America make up the tools of sporadic outright war and constant, slowly strangling blockade. There's a new triple alliance of white nationalists in Washington, those in Riyadh who fear and hate Shia Muslims, and an Israeli government that welcomes Kahanist racists into its governing circles. I see this three as Macbeth's three witches cooking up the pot to create a war against Iran. Another number in the litany of militarism. Despite closing recently hundreds of bases in Iraq and Afghanistan, the U.S. still maintains nearly 800 military bases, 800 in more than 70 countries around the world. Britain, France, and Russia put together have about 30 foreign bases, 700 U.S. bases. What are they doing? Are they defending the American people, or are they propping up violent, repressive dictators in a myriad other countries? We don't know, because most of us don't even know about those bases in the first place. And we're turning our own police, local police departments into military bases. Despite the public outcry after seeing tanks on the streets of Ferguson, Missouri, there continue to be massive gifts of murder weapons, military weapons, to local police forces, even including park police. What do you need bayonets for if you are the park police? What do you need machine guns for if you are the park police? Is this to stop people who are hunting against the regulations? And finally, the most intimate form of militarism of all, that we don't even call that. The guns all over, everywhere. And deaths from gun violence in ones and twos and ones and twos and ones and twos, over and over. And in the high schools, the churches, the synagogues, not ones and twos, but 17s, 11s, 9s. In this more random violence, we mostly think nobody's at fault except the shooter. But here's how it actually works. If you disinvest from a neighborhood to wipe out jobs and small businesses, you leave only despair incorporated, mostly in the form of drugs. The result, the businesses are called gangs, and the negotiating tools are called guns. That's not the only business we have based on violence. Profit-making prisons, companies that make tens of billions from that trillion-dollar nuclear weapons project. So here we are at a Passover Seder, when push came to shove for the ancient Pharaoh, when his slaves were fleeing and the firstborn were dead along with other firstborns. He played his last card. The military, the army he sent chasing after these runaway slaves with their horse chariots, which we might see as bombers, H-bombs, drones, the most advanced imperial weapons. That army and that Pharaoh's power found themselves caught in the sea of reeds. And what are reeds? They bend and they rise up again. They bend and they rise up again. And when they rose up again, they caught that army and made it impossible to continue. And it melted away in the sea of reeds. We need to be the sea of reeds. So one last thing, more, but time is indeed already up. One last thing. In our own generation, what does it mean to do what Dr. King called for? He said, non-violent existence or violent co-annihilation. So we need a new national commitment, not just to get rid of the guns, but to uproot the social roots of despair that are leading to murder. Suppose we took the profit out of selling guns, tanks, bombs, prison cells, big coal, big oil, and instead, suppose we invested in neighborhood solar co-ops, grocery stores, public transit, credit unions, public banks. The only true path beyond militarism is the birthing of actual beloved communities, while the deadly institutions of violence die around us.
So I want to introduce you now to a woman by the name of Shanti Love, who with her mother and her sisters created the Emir Healing Center here in Philadelphia. Emir stands both for the name of her brother, who at the age of 20 was murdered, and it also stands for, and she'll probably describe this, every murder is real for the family and friends who grieve.
Today I stand, thank you that we are able to have a moment in this journey and how important it is that we come together. And so I am truly honored, but also saddened that March 26, 1997, my entire world changed and the DNA of my family was ripped to pieces. It's because my brother was gunned down, 7 bullets in the back. And out of that, I will say that we're looking at not only the pain of people, but people like you and I who decide that we will not have it anymore. And that out of that birth, Emir Healing Center, Every Murder is Real, a center that allowed us to not only heal families, but to advocate for wrongful things that are done to black and brown people. And so I say I stand before you. Last night marked 81 murders in the city of Philadelphia. Last year, 351 homicides. And I stand before you serving over 600 families last year, watching mothers weep and fathers silent screams as they realize that their legacy they have buried them. That the hope and the dream of family, love, prosperity has ended. I stand before you as that plague of what gun violence does, as racism and internalized oppression, as police hunt us, and the internalized oppression as we hunt each other. I stand before you as that, because although I am part of that plague, witnessing it and trying to heal families, it is you, the people that I stand before in this moment of journey, has to be part of the cure, has to be a part of it, has to be willing to fight for what's right. Because the value of life is too precious to all of us. And I stand before you, the plague, and so honored, but also letting you know that you are a part of the cure.
So I'm going to ask you in silence once again to take in these painful words of Arthur's and of Shanta's. And at the same time as you're doing that, to pass around, you'll find on your table, either in the color white or red, some horseradish. For those of you who have tasted horseradish before, it comes from the root of the bitter herb. So I'd suggest you take just a little and not overwhelm yourself with the pain of the horseradish.
While we pass it out, a song for freedom. When we're walking out of Egypt, what would we sing? Ay, 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 Try with me. Ay, 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 ay,
So if you haven't yet done it, I'm going to invite you to please, once again, take the grape juice, refill your cups, and once we have done that around the entire table, we'll say the blessing, this time in Hebrew. So again, silently pass around the grape juice. So as you're ready, please raise your cups. In the raising of these cups, we commit ourselves to end materialism. Baruch atah Yah Eloheinu Ruach HaOlam Borei Peri Hagafen.
There is none like God. There is only one God. We could tell the world our God is one. En Eloheinu, en Adonenu, en Malkeinu, en Moshienu, en Eloheinu, en Adonenu, en Malkeinu, en Moshienu. La ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah. Tell the world our God is one, our God is one. Baruch Eloheinu, blessed be our God. Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu, Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu. La ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah. Our God is one. Atahu, you are the one, our God. Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu, Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu. La ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah, la ilaha illallah. Our God is one.
So I invite to the podium Reverend Liz Theo Harris, co-founder with Reverend Barber, the Poor People's Campaign.
I want to start with some words from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. When he announced the Poor People's Campaign in December of 1967, he was talking about the emergencies of his day. We seem to have another Pharaoh who likes to talk about emergencies. He says the emergency we now face is economic, and it is a desperate and worsening situation. The dispossessed of this nation, the poor, both white and Negro, live in a cruel and unjust society. They must organize against the structures through which the society is refusing to take means which have been called for and which are at hand to lift the load of poverty. Refusing to take the means which have been called for and which are at hand to lift the load of poverty. So Philadelphia, this beautiful interfaith, freedom-loving people, I don't need to tell you that we are indeed living in a cruel and unjust society. When there are 140 million poor and low-income people in the United States, when 39 million children live in poverty, 20 million elders live in poverty, 62 million workers make less than a living wage, when 15 million people can't afford water, and 4 million families, when they turned their taps on this morning, poisoned water came out. When 75% of poor people are women and children, when 60% of African Americans, 65% of Latinx, 40% of Asians are poor, when there are 67 million poor white Americans, we must say, this is not right. This is not moral. Our people are not free. We're not free. There are mothers like Callie Greer, who had to bury her daughter Venus because she didn't have health care, and Alabama wouldn't expand Medicaid. There are mothers like Leslie Boyd from North Carolina, whose son died because although he was working, although he was a full-time student, although he was doing community service in his community, he couldn't get health insurance because of a pre-existing condition, and he died. Or Danielle Morrow, whose mom died because of inadequate health care here in Pennsylvania in a nursing home. In Michigan, as we speak, there are 100,000 families without water. Mothers are losing their homes. Their kids are being taken away because they can't afford their water bills, some of them which are up to $1,000 a month. But the Nestle Corporation, for just a couple dollars a year, is able to bottle up that very same water and sell it to us for billions. Teachers in the Detroit public schools, the first day of school, have to tell the kids in their class, please don't tell me if you don't have water running in your house. You can come here early. You can use the sink in the bathrooms, but don't tell me, because I'm required to report it. And if I report it, you'll be removed from your home. This is in a world that is made of 2/3 water. And thousands of kids are being taken from their homes for not being able to afford it. I think we here and the folks across this country have a message for the authorities, for the pharaohs of our day. And that message is, take away our poverty, not our children. Take away our homelessness and not our children. Take away these low-paying, crappy jobs, not our children. Take away the polluting of the air and the land and our water, not our children. From families living with raw sewage in their yards in Lowndes County, Alabama, where moms tell us that they have every disease imaginable, to the thousands of homeless encampments across this country that are being evicted by the police, to the millions of people who work full-time and can't afford to provide for their families. We've heard the cry. We want to be free. We want to be free. So 51 years ago, when Reverend Dr. King was killed working to unite and organize poor people across race and geography and religion and issues, 51 years later, we're building the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And I want to tell you about the power of poor people persistently fighting and engaging in action. Moms like Callie Greer, who cried Rachel's wail in front of the U.S. Capitol, saying that her tears had cost too much for her not to spend every last breath in her body fighting for everybody to have health care. Or Black Muslim moms here in Philadelphia teaming up with Put People First Pennsylvania to try to shut down that hospital, shut down that nursing home in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, where people are dying, showing that poor white moms and poor black moms can indeed come together and organize. There is a powerful force brewing in this country. And Dr. King continues when he talks about that emergency, and he says, there are millions of poor people who have little or even nothing to lose. If they can be helped to take action together, they will do so with a freedom and a power that will be a new and unsettling force in our complacent national life. This evening, I want to invite all of you here and everyone across this country and world to join this new and unsettling force, to bring freedom and power to all of those impacted by poverty and materialism. God hates poverty. God wants to end poverty. May it be so.
So I want to introduce to you tonight Reverend Greg Holston. I'm going to give you a little bit about him, but he's coming to speak in a different way. He is the Executive Director of Power here in Philadelphia. He is since September 2017, he has been the pastor of Jane's Memorial United Methodist Church. But he's coming tonight as a father, a husband, father of 4 children, to talk about racial climate justice.
Like many of you, I have been blessed to have incredible children. All my children I love deeply and care deeply about. My youngest child has been such a blessing. There's always one child that seems to come into your life that seems to just come in and be who they are, and you wonder how you had this incredible gift. She is a graduate of Yale University. She is someone who has worked with Brian Stevenson at the Equal Justice Initiative. She was blessed to now be at New York Law School, going to graduate in 1 month. Lord have mercy, 1 month. She will be graduating, coming back to Philadelphia to be a public defender. And all of the faces of her success, I am still haunted with the face of her pain. For she grew up in South Philadelphia. She grew up not far from the refinery plant. She grew up at 23rd and Morris Street for our little row home that we got when we first got married, only a block or 2 from the church that we served in as an assistant pastor. And she was asthmatic. She spent most of her life, her last 12 years of life, gasping for air. It was many of the nights that we spent of her gasping for air, wondering when will the machine work, or should we take her to the hospital, or when we took her to the hospital, would they be able to care for her? She was always a small child, so it seemed like every muscle in her body was actually contracting when the asthmatic attack would occur, and we would just sit there wondering almost and feeling helpless to help our child in any way. And then we were able to move out of the area. And literally 1 month after moving out, she was able to throw the asthmatic machine away and never have another asthma attack in her life. We didn't initially make the connection between our moving and her freedom now. But later, even at an event where they were talking about environmental racism, I finally made the link that it was partly the refinery and the street that we lived on that was covered with soot from buses that would drive by and travel, SEPTA buses that would travel along that road, soot that would come up on our porches that we had to strip off over and over again and wash down every day, but it didn't seem to be enough. It was always present. It was always there, just a layer of dirt, a layer of dust, a layer of stuff that was going into her lungs. And we recognized for the first time we were at the intersection of climate and race, that we were victims of environmental racism, and it was happening all over the community I love. I recognize that the people that were at our church, that many who had died of unusual cancers, I had never made the connection that when I was preaching their eulogy, that they were victims of environmental racism. The people that I loved and I grew up with, until years later, I recognized when other people came to the community and surveyed the community and recognized that all of the people there had the same kind of legacy of cancerous and disease and asthma that was present. And I recognized that for the first time, this movement for change, this movement for climate change could no longer be just a white movement. It had to be a movement for all people, for all races, to come together, to fight together, to live together, to breathe together, and build a better planet together. We must do that together. We can do it if we work together. Thank you so much.
So, brothers and sisters, again, a minute of silence as we take in the pain and sorrow of materialism that causes poverty and greed and environmental racism. I invite you to stretch a little bit more. Perhaps not just the person next to you, maybe someone at the next table, someone you may not have yet spoken to. Turn to one person only and share, you will have 2 minutes each, the pain and sorrow of materialism.
Okay, I give you a cup now. You got it. You got the water? Yeah, I'm good. All right.
So people, the point of this conversation tonight is not to finish. We are just beginning. So once again, I'm going to ask you to refill your cups so that we can commit to ending materialism. And as we do that silently, I'm going to call up Imam Hassan to lead us in the same blessing, but this time in Arabic.
Thank you, Rabbi. In Arabic, Tabarak Rabb, Ahunar Rahim, Kalaku, Thamaratul, Kamarat.
And I invite now to the podium Anna Maria Arquila. You may not know the name, but this was one of the two women who confronted Senator Flake during the Kavanaugh hearings. We may not have won that one, but she won that moment.
Good evening, everyone. It is so incredibly powerful for me to be here with all of you tonight. Thank you, Rabbi Arthur, for extending this invitation. Thank you, Imam, for welcoming you into your home. Thank you all for being here. I will start by sharing that this is actually my first Seder ever. Um, and it will not be the last, for sure, but it perhaps will be the most memorable, because we're celebrating an incredible tradition, and our ability as humans to remake traditions so that we can build the world that we want ourselves to live in, the people we love to live in. And so I feel very, very moved by being part of this celebration of freedom. I was invited to speak about the fourth plague, the plague of sexism, of a plague that we all know exists. We all know, and I don't think it's controversial to say, that even in 2019, we live in a man's world. And that we live in a world where our culture, our politics, our economy are embedded with this idea that there is a hierarchy of human life and that men are inherently better at holding power, authority, and that at the same time, it is a truth of our culture and our country and our society that has been challenged from the beginning. And many of us have participated in challenging that truth. So I wanna spend the next few minutes both talking about the pain of patriarchy and sexism and the ways in which that system of power, that hierarchy of human life, is enforced. And I wanna talk about the struggles and the beauty of people who rise up and challenge it and do their best to change it. So we know we live in this world where women are, for the most part, not sharing equally in our democracy, equally in our economy, equally in our homes, that sexism is an ideology that gets enforced in many ways. It gets enforced through violence. I don't know if people saw yesterday, I believe it was published yesterday, an article in the New York Times that talks about the plight of women from Central America and specifically talks about the reality of women in Honduras. And there was one of many harrowing and just brutal descriptions of violence, but one statistic that just stuck with me, which is that 40% of women in Honduras who are killed show signs of torture beyond what was necessary to kill them. So violence is used not just to inflict pain and not just to kill, but in this case to demonstrate who is powerful and to send a lesson to those who are still alive. So violence is one of the ways in which sexist ideology and patriarchy get enforced. So is the silencing of the voices, the political voices of women. We know that today women have the right to vote in this country, but that was not always the case. In fact, this year we're celebrating 100 years of women, explicitly white women, having the right to vote, 100 years of the suffragist movement. And it took 100 years to win that right. It took 100 years of sustained struggle for women to be able to participate equally in our democracy. So there is both the pain of the silencing and the beauty of the struggle that eventually wins and delivers a form of freedom. We know that sexism also gets enforced through policy to control our bodies, policy to control our participation in our democracy and our economy. And we also know that women have been making incredible strides to defend our rights to control our bodies, to defend our rights in the workplace, to defend our rights in our homes, in our country. And so there is both the pain of having to fight for what should be ours and the beauty of winning the things that we now have and now are struggling to defend in this administration. We know that sexism also gets enforced through economic exclusion. It is true today that women get paid less for the work less than men for the same kind of work. We also know that women toil in the back of kitchens and in the living rooms of many people's homes, and in doing invisible labor that is so necessary for so many people to be able to do the visible labor. And so there is the economic exclusion of being paid less, but also of being more invisible. And then there is the beauty of the struggle of women organizing and winning tremendous victories. I think a state, I don't remember which state recently, just a few days ago, passed a bill to enshrine into law protections for domestic workers. Domestic workers across the country are waging this beautiful fight, this tremendously courageous fight, and winning in the places where they're fighting. Yes. And then there is this other form of enforcement of this hierarchy of human life, which is sexual violence. 1 out of 5 women in this country today will experience rape. And we live in a culture that in many ways permits that kind of statistic to be true. We all remember how that kind of looking away from sexual violence took place in a very visible way in our country during the debate around the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. And I want to share that what I saw was both the incredible sadness of women who were doing something tremendously courageous by sharing their stories of sexual assault in an effort to educate the country about the reality, the culture that enabled sexual violence in the first place, the pain of that violence, the legacy of that violence in our bodies for decades and decades. So I saw the pain, but I also saw the courage. What I saw was women doing something tremendously powerful, telling their stories in an effort to show up for each other, in an effort to demonstrate solidarity, walking past their pain and past their fear and past their shame to do something courageous, which was to contribute to building a mirror where all of us could look at each other and realize that this culture is real, but also that we had a tremendous opportunity to change this culture, and that the people in power in our country had a tremendous opportunity to signal to all of us that they would not reaffirm a culture that enabled sexual violence in the first place. The people in power failed, but women who told their stories did not fail. So when I came out of that fight, I drew 2 lessons from it. One is courage. Courage is contagious. It is necessary. When we see someone doing something courageous, we feel so awed by them and so invited by them to join them. And then we join them and we realize we too can be courageous and we can share it with others. And it is a thing that builds community and builds power, and it's profoundly beautiful and transformative. All of us can do it. And the other thing that I was reminded of is that all of us have this drive towards freedom. All of us have this drive towards freedom. And I remembered coming out of that fight why I told my story. I told my story in front of Senator Flake's office a few days before the elevator encounter. And I said, I was 5, he was 15, and when I was 5, I learned the lesson that we are not believed. And I learned the lesson, a rule of our culture, which is that boys will be boys and they will be forgiven. But I have a child, I have 2 children now, one is 6, one is 3, and I do not want them to learn that lesson. I do not want them to learn that lesson. And I remember, like Reverend, you talked about the child who has taught you so much. I have this child at home who has taught me so much. So my first child was born into a body that reads as the body of a girl. And when that child was 2, that child used words with so much urgency to tell something that was true. which was that he was in fact a boy. And it of course took me so much to understand that this was actually happening and to accept. What came out for me was first fear. This path of being gender nonconforming in our society is incredibly dangerous. I wanted it not to be a dangerous world for my child. But then once I was able to breathe out that fear, I realized that I was in the presence of someone who is so committed to his freedom. And I realized that we are all born with freedom in our hearts. And that's why we are able to do these courageous things, these incredibly difficult things for all of us. Because we are born with freedom in our hearts. So freedom is necessary, like water is necessary, like air is necessary. We all need it, and we all strive towards it. And that's why I feel so, so moved to have the opportunity to celebrate the idea of freedom and the possibility that all of us can build it together and have the country of our dreams. Thank you.
So as we just heard from Anna Maria, although we think of sexism most of the time being a woman's pain, sexism is also for some a man's pain, and often a trans pain, and often a gay and lesbian pain. I want to introduce to you Chris Bolden Newsom. Chris is an urban farmer. His email starts with okra. I think it's okra galore. He is the manager of the Sankofa farm at Bartram's Garden. And Sankofa, he has explained, is a bird carrying an egg in its mouth with its feet facing forward and its head turned back, the bird representing the power of taking the good from the past and bringing it into the present. So that's what Chris has been trying to do. 400 years of family history of farming, started in the Mississippi Delta, and he has brought it here to Philadelphia.
Well, good evening. You hear me? Okay. Well, first I want to thank so much all the people who've come before me. So grateful to be in the presence of such leaders. I want to give all praises to God, who is the center and ground of my life and of yours, whose name is mercy, and then to all my ancestors who are standing right here with me and with us in prayer. I want to talk to you today about black men. I've been one most of my life, so I feel qualified. I can tell you that black men in this country, since slavery, which we call the Great Disaster, have many times been the most visible representations of the race in the eyes of the dominant white power. During this Great Disaster, ships were intentionally overloaded with African men, with the purpose of breaking them first, to be used then in the most unmentionable ways to build this great nation. For the cause of a more perfect union, our bodies were broken and our souls were pressed down. Removed from the scene of the family through breeding camps, public beatings and lynchings, our sisters were left shouldering a mighty weight. Our women have been in our absence bedeviled, oftentimes monsterized as aggressive, mean, or uncooperative. When what I've seen is that these women were just humans doing double duty. Our women by force had to be daddy without the respect or the pay, warriors without the protection of a team, and all while being expected to be ladies in every sense. So throughout history and in my own short 41 years, I've seen how black men have been discouraged and have discouraged one another from supporting our families, from forming networks of care. Those became gangs. I've also seen situations where brothers have been alienated, and this particularly in my experience as a Southern farmer living in the North, from our relationship to the land. We don't want any part of it. Instead, we've learned to hide our pain behind muscles and swagger, and attitude and toughness. As a young man, I was taught that I could not hold my tenderness as an artist and a dreamer and my manhood at the same time. It was just too heavy to carry both. So this meant that for me as a son, I could no longer kiss my mother and father in public, that it was more acceptable for me to fight for my siblings than to tell them that I loved them. As a same gender-loving man, I was told that the gifts God gave me to lift up and hold together my people were not needed. Now, thanks to our loving Creator, I heard other voices first. The strong and beautiful elders in my life, like Father Marty Morgan, Donald Glenn Sneed of blessed memory, my partner Owen Taylor, and my first hero, Rufus Newsom, my daddy. Because of these righteous and imperfect men, I daily take on the call to fulfill my role as nurturer and protector, leader and servant, lover and friend, alongside my sisters. And now to my brothers, I offer this invitation as it was offered to me. Your people need you. Will you put down your play pretties, like my great-grandfather Fred used to say, and come to them? Your life, wherever you may be in it, is no obstacle or barrier to the healing that we all need and of which Almighty God has given you a share, to share. So during the great disaster, the choice was made for us as black men. Today, we must choose to commit ourselves to never again permitting our families or other families to be separated as they were, and to never again leave a people in need.
So once more, in silence, I'm going to ask you to fill the fourth cup of grape juice, keeping in your hearts and minds the pain and sorrow we've heard from Anna Maria and from Chris. And when we're ready, we're going to recite in Spanish the blessing over the grape juice led by Anna Maria. So.
Oh, I'm singing. Oh, sorry.
So we lift our cups to pledge and commit to end racism. Sexism.
And racism.
And materialism. And militarism.
Bendito seas, aliento de la vida, nuestro Dios, quien es la fuente
la fuente
del fruto
del fruto
de la viña.
de la vida.
Peace and blessings. So as we look at these hard truths, at some point we look at the vision at the end of the road. So I want to sing this song and invite you to sing along with me, a song that is affirmation, declaration about the end of sexism. We could dream into it, envision it, hold it as we work for it, right? So your part will be 4 lines, and I'll sing the first line, you'll sing after. The words are, my body is arising, my mind is healing, my heart is mending, my soul is transcending. I'll sing the verse, and when you hear the words, my body is arising, you come in after me, okay? Whoops. That wasn't your note. Rise to this tone of wholeness, heal to the core with boldness, while blessings and grace surround us. Arise, breathe in the universal, stand on ancestral shoulders, and no limitations can hold us. Arise, my body is arising, my body is arising, my mind is healing. Hey, hey, my heart is mending. Hey, hey, my soul transcending. Hey, hey. This healing declared complete. We rise to our destiny, to love that will set us free. Arise, for now we have overcome. Give thanks for the battle won, and blessings and peace enfold us. Arise, my body is arising. Yeah, yeah, my mind is mending. Hey, yeah, hey, yeah, my heart is mending. Yeah, my soul transcending. Hey, yeah, my body is arising. Body is arising, my mind is healing. Hey, yeah. My heart is mending. Hey, my soul transcending. Hey, my body is arising. Hey, yeah, my mind is mending. Yeah, my heart is healing. Hey, my soul transcending. Hey, we will arise. We will arise. We will arise. We are rising. We're for every little girl. We will for every woman. Hey, we'll arise. We will arise. Yeah, we will arise. Yeah, yeah, we will arise.
So, folks, why is this Seder, why is this night different from all other nights? Recite with me the third and the fourth questions or answers to that question. On this night, we open our eyes to new ways of seeing what's true. On this night, we define our commitment to act with justice, peace, and healing. And I invite Reverend William Barber.
Let me say, first of all, hello to all of my mother's children and my father's children. The great God, as someone told me, all of us, in some ways, the sons and daughters of Abraham and Sarah. It is good to be here tonight. I want us to start by thanking God for the courage of Arthur Wasco in the midst of the post-traumatic stress syndrome of our leaders being killed to decide not to die, but to form a freedom Seder. '69 it was, 50 years ago. I also want to share with you that we all have things we battle. I want you to know I didn't just walk out. I'm not been battling a condition for 30 years and winning. But part of the winning means I can't sit in a position but so long if I'm going to keep on running. And so I want you to know that I do know both my religious training and my home training. But I could feel the spirit of those of you as I went to sit in a place that was just a little bit softer than that chair or that stool. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'll be a slave to militarism, to sexism, to racism. Before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. What is the pathway to freedom in this moment? When we see pornographic sums of money being spent in the fight against justice by oligarchic and repressive members of a shameless aristocracy. Liz, what is the pathway to freedom? When politicians who put their hands on Bibles, sometimes the Hebrew scriptures, sometimes the Quran, and repeat the pledge to uphold the Constitution, and they know they are lying when they say it. and don't intend to do so. What is the pathway to freedom when far too many leaders, political and religious, cower and capitulate in the face of power for partisan and extremist advantage, rooted in racism, classism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, homophobia, sexism, fear, and downright demonic meanness? What is the pathway to freedom? When a president in the 21st century feels like he can spew openly racist rhetoric and policies today in consistent and blatant ways we haven't heard from a president or a major politician since the days of the 19th century and the early of 20th century or in the 1960s, all while being politically enabled by a supporting cast. What is the pathway to freedom? When Islamophobic and anti-Latino immigrant policies are passed undergirded by language that could very well have been used by the fascism of Hitler. And far too many clergy remain silent, as rhetoric and policies are spurring and spewing violence. What is, a fifth question, if you will, the pathway to freedom? I've been thinking about that, Arthur, Rabbi. And tonight, in this place, I could reach back, all the way back, and talk about freedom and what it should mean to us today from a document written July 4th, 1776, 243 years ago, and gave a pathway to freedom laid out in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which means it's flawed from the beginning because it said only all men. But in there is this word that we often don't go down and read, which is a pathway to freedom. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish and to institute a new government. We could chart a pathway from here, but I don't want to there. Or I could reach back, all the way back to 1787, 232 years ago, and discuss what the Constitution said about freedom, we the people. First of all, there's no room for I and I alone can fix things. That's not only demonic, it's not democratic. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, that's confession, that's admittance that you are not perfect. Establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Freedom is never mentioned, but liberty is. But liberty in the Constitution is only a liberty where justice is established. And anything else is not worth passing on to anybody, let alone your children. Or I could go to July 5th, 1852, and chart a pathway to freedom. 9 years before the Civil Rights War began, Frederick Douglass said, when he was invited to speak at a July 4th celebration, he said, let me tell you something. If you're going to fix this nation, The feeling of the nation must be quickened. The conscience of the nation must be roused. The propriety of the nation must be startled. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed, and its crime against God and man must be proclaimed and denounced if you really want freedom. What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him more than any other day in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim of. He said, your celebration is a sham. Your boasted liberty and unholy license, your national greatness, swelling vanity, your sounds of rejoicing are empty and heartless. Your denunciation of tyrants, brass-fronted impudence, your shouts of liberty and equality, hollow mockery, your prayers, your hymns, your sermons, your thanksgiving, with all of your religious praise and solemnity. To him are bombast, fraud, deception, impiety, and hypocrisy. And you know who echoed Frederick Douglass? Rabbi Heschel. When in 1963, prior to the March on Washington, he sent a letter to John F. Kennedy and said, Mr. President, we in America forfeit the right to even think about worshiping God until we do right by the Negro. I could take both of them and chart a path toward freedom. Or I could go right here, since we're in Pennsylvania tonight, I could reach back to 1863, 156 years ago, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation. But on down in that, he says this, he says, the real question is, shall a nation by the people, for the people, is the work that we're doing so that it shall not perish from the earth? Or I could go back to this Quaker sister, an abolitionist, suffragist, Lucretia Mott. Lucretia Mott said, I have no idea of submitting tamely to an injustice inflicted either on me or on the slave. I will oppose it with all the moral powers with which I am endowed. I am no advocate of passivity. That's a good pathway to freedom. And then she went on to say, the world has never yet seen a truly great and virtuous nation, because in the degradation of women, the very fountains of life are poisoned at their source. Or I could reach back to 1964, 55 years ago, and lift up what Fannie Lou Hamer said when she said, listen, at the Democratic Convention, I was in jail when Medgar Evers was murdered. All of this on account of we wanted to register to become first-class citizens. And if the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. And that is a pathway to freedom. Those who would dare question injustice and question America. Or I could go back 51 years ago this past Thursday, or 51 years ago this past Wednesday, 1968, and Dr. King had delivered his speech at Riverside, the time to break silence, named racism, materialism, poverty, and militarism as evils. The next day, 150 newspapers, including some black newspapers, wrote against him. Civil rights organizations who honor him now left him. The church he was a part of walked away from him. Some Jewish, some Muslim, some Christians left him. Everybody love him now. Unions left him. We know he was right now, but then he lost his invitation to the White House, decided to move into the Poor People's Campaign. And the night before he was killed, he wouldn't see 24 hours, but that night he said this, and it's a good pathway to freedom. He said, looking at America, he said, America is a sick nation. But we got to give ourselves, I don't know if I'll make that, we got to give ourselves to this struggle until the end, because nothing would be more tragic than for us to stop at this point. That's a good pathway. Nothing would be more tragic Or just a few days after, we talk about Martin, but we say little about Coretta. Coretta was the one that brought him to militarism. It was Coretta that was right on the war question before Martin was in the war question. And it was Coretta in the midst of her pain when she was asked, Coretta, how do you feel about violence? Your husband was just shot. His spine was just severed by a 30-06 deer rifle. Tell us about violence. She said, well, that is a kind of violence. But let me tell you, poverty can produce a violence. And in this society, violence against poor people is routine. She said, I remind you, starving a child is violent. Suppressing a culture is violent. Neglecting school children is violence. Discrimination against the working man is violent. Ghetto housing is violence. Ignoring medical needs is violence. Contempt for equality is violence. And she said, and this is not many days after her husband had been shot, she said, and even an apathetic attitude that doesn't address these other forms of violence is in itself violence. But being part Pentecostal and part Native American, listening to the Spirit and the Wind, and another third white and another third black in my whole DNA, I couldn't get settled. I couldn't get settled on what to say tonight until I ran by the prophets of ancient Israel. And it was as though the prophets of old had the way forward, like the Sankofa bird. And I found myself finding a pathway to freedom laid out nearly 2,700 years ago by this one named Jeremiah. Honored both in Islam and in Judaism and in Christianity. It was Jeremiah who once said, oh, that my head was a fountain of tears, that I might cry on behalf of the nation. Then in a moment of terrible national leadership, a time when one of Trump's cousins was leading the nation, at least politically his cousin, and the nation was traveling down the way of injustice, as though enslaved by a commitment to inhumanity. And this wasn't anti-Semitism either, because he was critiquing Israel, but it's a critique for us today. The prophet is given from God a pathway to true freedom that America needs to hear today. And so I asked a rabbi to help me bring this text to light. Where is she?
Jeremiah 22, verses 1 through 5. Kol amar Adonai, red Beit Melech Yehuda, v'dibarta sham et hadavar hazeh, v'amarta Shema Devar Adonai Melech Yehuda Hayoshev Al Kisei David Ata Vavadecha Va'amcha Habaim V'sha'arim Ha'eleh Ko amar Adonai asu mishpat utzdaka v'hatzilu gazul miad ashok v'ger v'atom v'amana al tono al tachmosu v'dam naki al tishbechu b'makom hazeh ki im na'aso tasu et hadavar hazeh uva'u b'sha'arei habayit hazeh melachim yoshvim leDavid al kiso rochvim v'rechev uvasusim hu avatav ve'amo ve'im lo tishma'u et hadvarim ha'ela bi nishpati ne'um Adonai ki lecharba yehiyah habayit hazeh.
And I had thought today, thank you, I wish I had a Muslim brother or sister that could translate that in Arabic. But in a more modern translation, let me share with you this pathway to freedom. In the Message Bible, it reads like this: these are God's orders. Go down to the royal palace and deliver this message and say to the rulers, listen to what God says, O King of Judah, you who sit on David's throne, you and your officials and all the people who go in and out of these palace gates. This is God's message. Attend to matters of justice. Set things right between people. Rescue victims from their exploiters. Don't take advantage of the homeless and the stranger and the immigrant, the orphans, the widows, and stop murdering. And if you obey these commands, then kings who follow in the line of David will continue to go in and out of this palace gates mounted on horses and riding in chariots, they and their officials and the citizens of Judah. But if you don't obey these commands, then I swear, God says, this place will end up a heap of rubble. This, my friends, I believe, is where we are. And the pathway to real freedom given to ancient Israel needs to be given to America today. Notice God gives orders to the prophets, go publicly and tell the kings, go publicly. The first pathway to freedom is not voting. I know y'all gonna get mad, but hear me. I believe in voting. I fight for voting. I know it. I've been in the trenches. My life has been threatened for fighting for the right to vote. I've been told I'd be dead in 3 months for challenging, but I know that voting alone is not what's going to help it, because, as Rabbi Heschel says, until you have prophetic imagination, you will not have a prophetic implementation. We must not only vote, we must register people for a movement that can change the entire narrative of why we're voting both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republican. Otherwise, the poison of the system itself will contaminate everybody, and we can do both and at the same time. The first pathway to freedom is to take an unyielding freedom and justice message directly to the seats of power. Look at this text. Apply it to the 21st century. Don't send a letter. Don't send another damn tweet. Don't send an email. Don't send a nice prayer. Don't have a service away from the White House. No, God's orders to us, the prophetic remnant, is to go down to the king's palace and interrupt what's going on with a message of freedom and justice. And if we don't want to do that, we don't really want freedom. Go down to the State House. Go down to the White House, and that's why the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival. We're not an organization, but an organism, saying it's time to make our voices heard right at the State House and the White House. The pathway to freedom must lead us to challenge the unjust policies and oppressive policies that enslave lives to poverty and racist voter suppression and ecological devastation and the war economy and to militarism and to sexism. We must challenge these policies that are killing people. But our challenge must be direct. Jeremiah, go down. Then the prophet Jeremiah is very specific about what God says to deliver if the nation desires to go down the right path. He says, tell them, attend to the matters of justice. Not all this other foolishness. Set things right between people. Rescue victims from their exploiters. Don't take advantage of the stranger, the immigrant, the orphan, the widow, and stop murdering. Notice how God's orders Jeremiah is a narrative and a language shift. He doesn't say, go down there and be on the left. Go down there and be on the right. The conversation is changed to a moral critique. A matter of our existentialism and our existence. It's not a merely call to merely wants and the wishes of the ruler based on his or her feeling or personal desire. God says, I am overruling every ruler. And I need some folk that still believe that there's a God who sits high but looks mighty low. God gives a language rooted in what's good for the least of these, the people on the margins. And that's the only pathway to freedom. Any pathway being offered to us that says we just gonna fix the middle class is nothing more than the same old enslavement to our fears. Until there is a call for the agenda being set first based on the needs of those on the margin, based on those and it must be set by, help to be set by those of us who aren't on the margins along with those who are. Attend to matters of justice, set things right between the people, rescue victims from the exploiters, don't take advantage of the immigrants and the homeless, the orphan, the widows, and stop murdering. And it doesn't say just stop kings, stop the whole system. I got one more thing. I hope y'all don't run me out. I'm about through. What the mess we in now is not just about Trump. And if you think all we have to do is unelect Donald Trump and somehow everything was all right prior to 2016, before he got elected in 2016, 30-some million people still didn't have health care. There were 140 million people that Liz told you about that were poor before he got elected in 2016. 26 states had still participated in racial voter suppression. Now what Trump is, like what the kings were in Jeremiah's day, they were the symptom. Kind of like what comes out of your nose when you sneeze. That ain't nothing but the symptom, baby. That's not the problem. And you don't treat the symptom, you wipe the symptom. But if you're going to treat the problem, you got to get down on the inside of the body politics. Not just about Trump, it's a whole cohort of extremist politicians. It's not just about Trump, and it ain't the first time, and it's not the worst thing we've ever seen. My God, stop saying that. Trump ain't the first racist president we ever had. Not the worst. Don't y'all know about slavery and the Holocaust? God gave God gave Jeremiah for the nation. He said, listen, the only way you can deal with this is not just get another king, but attend to matters of justice. Set things right between people. Rescue the victims from their exploiters. Don't take advantage of the immigrants, the homeless, the orphan, the widows. Stop murdering. And that's why the Poor People's Campaign, many of you have joined, thousands of people have put their bodies on the line in state capitals and U.S. Capitol just as a launching. Right now, there are bus tours going on in 28 states across this country. And right now, led by indigenous people, led by impacted people. That's why this June, Liz and Roz Pellis and others, and we're having a poor people's Moral Action Congress, a PMAC. If they got a CPAC, we need a PMAC. Huh? That's why we're releasing a constitutional and justice poverty budget. That's why we're calling for full congressional hearings on the issues of poverty and racism and ecological devastation and the war economy, militarism. That's why we're inviting the presidential candidates to come to the PMAC and shut up for a minute and sit down and listen to the poor people and impacted people who know what life is like so that they will attend to justice and set things right between the people. And that's why in 2020, right after the primaries and just before the convention, we're planning a Poor People's Assembly mass moral march on Washington for a just democracy and economy. And I hope every one of you will come, thousands of you. And when we get there, the stage is going to be given to the people who are suffering, that they might not only declare their pain, but say to the nation what the answers are. Because the prophets are already among us. They are living in Anathoth. My Jewish friends know what I'm talking about. Anathoth, like Jeremiah was from. And we're doing all of this, planning also some more massive civil disobedience, direct action, but not away from the house, but at the people's house. Because we must deliver loud and clear, attend to matters of justice. For what we are seeing, I'm through now, is not new in America. It ain't about liberal versus conservative. It's not about right versus wrong. It's once again about the heart and the soul of America. And in the real sense in this movement, the fight is, can America even be America? That's what it's really, every time we come to a moment like that, that's the question. Can we even be what we put on paper? Can we even be what we claim in our deepest religious values? This moment, once again, is whether or not we as a nation will be slaves to policies of violence and oppression or free in the service of policies of justice, love, nonviolence, and liberation. And we must have a movement, not another organization, but a movement that takes right to the place of power a divine, moral, and prophetic message and warning. Attend to matters of justice. Set things right between the people. Rescue victims from their exploiters. Don't take advantage of the homeless, the stranger, the orphan, the widow. Stop murdering. 26 states engaged in racist voter suppression, and it's killing people. Today is 2015 days today. This country has refused to fix the Voting Rights Act that Heschel and many others marched for. And it's killing people because it's allowing people to pass policies or block policies that would either bring life or death. 37 million people without health care is killing people. That means 24 people are dying every hour for the lack of health care. 250,000 people are dying from poverty every year. More than die from heart attack, strokes, and cancer. People are dying falsely incarcerated, dying from the victims of sexism. I don't know it like a woman, but I also know sexual abuse. And it doesn't kill you physically, it'll damn well try to kill you mentally and kill your spirit. And this murder is going on in the name of democracy, in our name, by elected leaders. Thousands. And the worst part of it, Mordecai, is thousands, hundreds of thousands are disinterested in even believing in possibility. We keep talking about this last election. Trump didn't win. He got in through an electoral college. This is racist from the beginning. That was designed to do exactly what he did. He got in because of the white Southern strategy that was put in place in 1969, designed to last 50 years. This is the 50th year. But he was also put in because 100 million people stayed home because they don't hear anybody really talking about attending to justice. They hear bits and pieces. And politicians can't deliver this message. The prophetic community must do it. And then the worst of it all is in this moment we're in, just like in Jeremiah's moment, we got a lot of Hananiahs, paid court false prophets in the garb of religion that are telling rulers you don't have to tend to justice, just give tax cuts to the wealthy. You don't have to care about immigrants, lock up the borders. You don't have to get guns off street. You all those women will go somewhere after a while. You don't have to worry about health care. You got health care. And they're doing it in the name of God. They're saying to leaders in the name of God, or their false God. As long as you are against gay people, as long as you're for prayer in the school, as long as you're against a woman's right to choose, as long as you're for tax cuts for the wealthy, and as long as you're for guns, God is pleased. Only prophets can stand up now and take on the false prophets and say, no. Attend to matters of justice, set things right between the people, rescue victims from the exploiters. Don't take advantage of the homeless, the stranger, the orphan, and the widow, and stop murdering. And so, for freedom's sake, for justice' sake, for truth's sake, for the sake of the present, the sake of the future, the sake of all those whose blood we stand in that they shed before we ever got here, we must deliver Jeremiah's message in the 21st century and demand change. Because this truth has in it hope. The rest of the verse says, if the leaders listen, this nation will be well. But it also says, if they don't, this nation will be abolished. And it ain't saying nothing but what the Declaration of Independence said. If the government is not going to serve the cause of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for everybody, then it ought to be altered. And if it ain't going to do it, it ought to be abolished, because it is not in line with the great promises and possibilities that God has set before us. But the prophets always believed, if I tell the message, there's going to be a remnant that'll hear it. And so it's time not to sit back and just let things happen. It's time for us to still believe up above my head there's music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. I know we in this cute time, and I got my brothers and sisters, my atheist friend, and we walk with them, and I love them, and I'm not talking about anybody else. I'm just talking about me right now. When I see some of the demonic stuff that's happening in the name of policy and the way in which people are being controlled by something that cannot be human, and their wickedness in high places, and they're willing to control and destroy the lives of people, I must believe there's a counterforce in the universe. And I hear that force calling, Barbara, Mordecai, Arthur, you got one more in you, Liz, Gregory, Maria, these are my orders. These are my orders. Tell them living wages and guaranteed protections for the poor, my orders. Tell them not destroying this society and environment is my orders. Tell them labor rights and affordable houses is my orders. Tell them fair policies for immigrants is my orders. Tell them equality in education is my orders. Tell them loosening the prisons that have locked too many of our people up is my orders. Tell them health care for everybody is not Bernie's orders, is my orders. Tell them fighting the proliferation of guns is my orders. Tell them to stop lying about Muslims and being anti-Semitic toward Jewish people, and stop punishing Palestinians and applauding Netanyahu. Those are my orders. Expanding voting rights, they're God's orders. Protecting women, God's orders. Loving the LGBTQ community. If I made them, you better love them. God, my orders. Equal protection under the law is non-negotiable. Those are my orders. We got to deliver it to the courts. deliver it at the ballot box, deliver it at the pulpit, and deliver it to the State House, to the White House, to the Capitol House, which is our house anyway. So, Arthur, you invited me, and I went to fasting and praying. And the Lord spoke to me, and I confirmed it with somebody else. I ain't told Liz and nobody else. Said, you can't do this tonight and leave it there. So since we got Muslims here, and Christians here, and Jews here, Ramadan is over June the 4th. Arthur, I'm asking you, in the 50th year, you and your partner and others that are here, Liz, on June 4th, on June 5th, let's put 1,000 rabbis and imams and Christian pastors in full vestment and walk down the center street of Washington, D.C. and deliver God's orders. 1,000 of us, unified. 1,000 of us, unified in the name of the God that is and above everything. I want to work on it. I don't know what it'll do, but I know what's going to happen if we don't do it. The leaders will say they didn't know. It's time for us to make sure that ain't no excuse that anybody can ever claim that they didn't know what God wanted. And so I pray tonight, that great hymn of the Christian faith, grant us wisdom, grant us courage for the facing of this hour. Free us from the fears that long have bound us. Free our hearts. Grant us wisdom. Grant us courage for the facing of these hours. Save us, God, from weak resignation to the evils that we deplore. Let the search for thy salvation and be our glory evermore. Grant us wisdom. Grant us courage for the facing of this hour. Jeremiah is gone, but we are his sons and daughters, and the same God of Jeremiah is calling us today. Go down to the king's palace and tell him what my orders are, and then watch me go to work on the heart of this nation.
What is this matzah? The voice of the universe said, don't wait around for the bread to rise. Now is the time, said the voice. That march that night was not to commemorate the past. It was to transform the future. Dr. Martin Luther King said, the fierce urgency of now. That is what this matzah is in every generation. When Rabbi Jesus from the Galilee came together with his closest allies on the night of the Seder and raised the matzah, it was not in commemoration of an ancient time, but it came at the Passover time to transform the future. That is what we are here for tonight, what we have heard, the call for, the pain, the joy of life, the pain of oppression, and the hope that is not an emotion, but an action. Now, the fierce urgency of now. All right. So I don't know what page it is in your booklets, but what? Page 8, thank you. Page 8. So the blessing is the blessing of urgency. And we say it, all of us together. Blessed are you, the breath of life, our God, by whatever name we call you, who brings forth bread from the earth, who brings forth the fierce urgency of now from our world so sick, the fierce urgency of now. And now, that fierce urgency as a commitment to fierce urgency to act.
Page 9.
When Israel was in Egypt land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. As Israel stood by the waterside, let my people go. At God's command he did divide. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. When they had reached the other shore, let my people go. They sang the song of freedom, oh, let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. Oh, set all earth from bondage free. Let my people go. And let all life be free to be. Let man water flow. Rise up, yes, rise up. No longer in every land. Tell all pharaohs, let my creation grow. As we live here in America, set all people free. In all our colors we resist, from sea to shining sea. Rise up, oh people, rise up across this land. Tell new errors your oppression will not stand.
So everyone, let us stand together, holding up your matzah if you haven't finished it. And the last words, next year in a world of freedom. Thank you all for being with us. Freedom for all.